gardening.com. It's December and it's starting to feel like winter yet. Not officially winter yet. I think it's we're about 2 weeks into December now. So I think it's the 14th maybe. Everything's starting to freeze up. The ground's frozen in the garden. On some days it can warm up enough for the ground to thaw. But as far as I can tell, there's more days where the ground's frozen than there is thawed. So this kale is kind of done growing for the season. But I'm going to show you how I winterize the kale. That is to say, I have a variety of kale here. It's not very good at surviving the winter where I live here. Lots of kales can survive the winter. This one can't. It's very good tasting kale, so I like it. So I'm going to set it up to, I'm going to effect like almost like a little greenhouse over this kale, kind of like a temporary greenhouse or a temporary cold frame, that general idea. There's a few things I got to do to get the garden ready prior to that, so I'm going to show you all of that, and I'm going to explain the logic and reasoning of this sort of thing as I go. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so here I have a bed of kale. You can see I got developed growth, well, I got new growth, but the ground right now is just frozen solid about 2 inches down, and the kale really isn't going to grow that much for the remainder of the season. So I've got these plastic domes, you can see them over there, and I've got lots of videos on how to make them. There's many different ways to make them. There's cheap, quick and easy ways, and more involved, tedious but better constructed ways to make them, and I've got videos on both. But anyway, the idea is that I'm going to remove all the dead foliage. I'm actually going to remove everything that's sort of harvestable that can be eaten from these as well, and just leave the little bit. And what'll happen here is that, right now the ground's frozen. This kale really isn't growing. It's frozen, and it's waiting to thaw. And once the kale thaws, and once the ground thaws, then it grows a little bit. But this time of year, we're getting closest to the shortest days of the year. Lots of people make cold frames and pretend, and maybe it depends on where you live, I suppose, but where I live, you're kind of, it's really not growing in the winter. It's kind of just waiting for spring, because there's not a lot of light, right? Things need light to grow. And this time of year, there just isn't a lot of light. There is sun, but it's very short days, and lots of days are overcast. And underneath just a really simple dome, it still goes below zero here every night. So if the things are growing, but they're growing so slowly that you really can't come out here and harvest and harvest and harvest and harvest. They're just, I'm going to cut everything down here to just the smallest stuff. And then I'll do a follow-up in January and a follow-up in February, follow-up in March. What I predict is that at some point in March, these will start to grow a little more regularly, right? Because we're getting into, spring at the end of March. And the idea behind all of this is that I'm going to have the roots of these plants are going to survive the winter, and kale's a biennial plant, so in its second year its plan is to go to seed. It's going to make these big flowers about 3-4 feet high and make these pods, and it's going to produce seeds. But before it does that, it puts on a lot of growth, a lot of vegetative growth. So in April and May you can get a harvest from these. So then I do that, and then I pull them in late May, and that's about the time I can start planting things like beans and squash and transplants and stuff like that. So I just leave them in the ground till late May or even early June. Then I pull them all, just compost them basically, and plant something else, right? I don't let them grow the second year, but I do let them grow a little bit in the spring when there's really not a lot of other stuff coming out of the garden. But these have well-developed big root systems with all this energy stored in them, so they're going to do a lot of growing in April and May. So I can take advantage of that and have some nice fresh greens coming out of the garden. So let's get at her here. So the process here is I'm just sort of cleaning the plant up. I'm removing dead growth. I'm putting that in one container for the compost. Right? You could just leave it in the garden, I suppose, but there's people that say I can harbor pests. I don't know to what extent that's the case, but it doesn't really hurt anything. That one is just okay. So some of these are kind of freezer burnt and not any good. This one's good. This one here That's kind of shot, so that's compost. Right here I got a nice little green here. Same with this. I'll take those, put that in the eating pile. All right, all those stuff are going into the house, and we'll either eat them over the next few days or blanch and freeze. That looks okay to me. So I've removed most of the foliage, and I've left, I think that's broken, so I'll take it. I've left a little bit of foliage. The plant still has a means to perform photosynthesis when it thaws out. And another thing, you know, you don't want them too close. Notice how I planted these about 6 or 7 inches from the edge, right? That was with the idea of having a dome over this in winter. This box is about the right size for my domes, so none of them are right up against the edge. Anything against the edge is going to get so cold that, you know, it's just not, it might survive the winter, but it's not going to do any growing in late winter, early spring. Well, what I've done here, I got to do with all the plants, and then once I've done that, I can put a dome over them. So let's get into that. So I've removed all the sort of edible good greens. That's enough for about 1, maybe 2 meals. Really, maybe 1 meal, I'd say. 1 meal with the stems. Sorry, 1 meal with no stems. Maybe 2 meals if we use the stems. Okay, so that's all done. Now all I got to do is effect a microclimate over that. That should only take a couple seconds. All right, so I got the dome on here. You can see it's not a perfect fit, right? You can see there's some space here. So the easiest way to deal with that is to just stuff some leaves or an old shirt or cardboard or newspaper. Just stuff something in there for a little bit of insulation. It's not going to be perfect, right? All you're trying to do is affect the situation here where every day where there's sun, the soil is thawing out and the ground cannot get a frozen state, right? It might freeze a little bit, but some days it'll freeze a bit, some days it'll thaw, some days it'll freeze. Whenever it's sunny, it's going to get warm in here, it's going to thaw out. And hopefully that will allow the roots of the greens you're trying to preserve to survive the winter. Some greens are really tough and some aren't. Especially where I live, there's a lot of precipitation in the winter, and so the ground is not only cold, but it can be like frozen like ice, and so that starves the roots of air and that sort of thing. So all of that can affect the ability of the plant to survive the colder months. And I know lots of people, they leave the kale in all year long and it just lives just fine. That's some combination of the variety they plant and just the conditions where they are. For people that are concerned about wind blowing these things away, if they can fit perfectly into a raised bed like this, such that the sides of the raised bed are above the bottom of the dome, the wind shouldn't be able to pick them up. And I know people are going to say, well, it's really windy where I live. Trust me, it's really windy where I live. I'm near the Atlantic Ocean. Generally speaking, okay, in an exceptional event, all bets are off, okay? But generally speaking, if the sides of the bed are higher than the bottom of the dome, the wind just can't get in there to lift it. If you're concerned about that, or like this one here where it's not a perfect fit, so this is not fitting perfectly into the raised bed, so the wind can get underneath it and lift it. So one thing you can do is just have stakes and just pin stakes right all the way around it, so it really can't go anywhere. Might lift up a little bit here or there with a gust, but can't go anywhere if you just pin stakes all the way around it. Another thing you can do, which I've done in the past, is you just drive a nail into the side of the bed and stretch a rope across the top of it. You can just do it. You only need one rope. Just put a rope over the middle. I like to use a trucker's hitch to ratchet it down. Put a rope or a bungee cord or something like that over the top of it. That'll just keep it from lifting up and flying off into outer space. That's all you need to do. Just tie it down. Or you can just lean heavy things on it, which I've done in a pinch before as well. But tying it down seems to work the best. Anyway, that's how I preserve greens for the winter. After I've picked the last greens I can pick and the ground seems like it's going to stay frozen or mostly frozen from this point onwards. I mean, some years I have to do this in November, you know, and some years I have to do this in December, right? I actually left it quite late. I probably should have done this 2 weeks ago. The ground's been freezing up a lot lately. I got another bed of kale I got to deal with, same sort of thing. But other than that, my kale's pretty much done for the year. But that's what I do. So hopefully these will survive the winter. We'll do a couple checkups on them in the dead of winter when everything's covered in snow to see how well everything's doing, see how frozen the ground is, that sort of thing. But other than that, we're just gonna let it relax for the winter. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.